Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben, and today we're taking a look at Deep Carbon Observatory. This is the second edition of the adventure by Patrick Stewart and Scrap Princess in hardback form. It's been heavily revised, it's been expanded, and the layout has been redone to make it much easier to run. This is one of the first adventures, at least the original paperback version was, that I bought from the old school scene. It was the first thing that really sold me on how good the creativity and the writing was in this particular part of the D&D world. So I'm very excited to see that it is now in this expanded form that makes it much more accessible to all sorts of people, both in the OSR or even in 5e. Before we dig into it though, quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is Into the AM and their series of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror themed t-shirts. This one I think would work really well if you're running some sort of Dolmenwood or perhaps an Underdark campaign, very appropriate for Patrick Stewart, with the skull and the mushrooms and the sense of decay. A lot of their shirts also glow in the dark, which really appeals to my inner 10-year-old. The shirts are all very comfortable and they're very affordable as well. Right now they have a deal going on where for $60 you can get 3 t-shirts in a bundle. And then by using the link down in the description below, you can get an additional 10% off. I've been very happy with all the t-shirts that they've sent me. I suggest you go check that out as well. Thanks again to Into the AM. And now let's get back to our show. All right, so what do we get inside Deep Carbon Observatory? Well, we have 3 little ribbons at the bottom, very decadent. And we meet our socially conscious trilobite who introduces us to the adventure. He reminds us to always adjust the adventure to your own personal cognitive load and remember to have fun. Just make sure it's socially conscious fun. Always remember, kids. Deep Carbon Observatory. So some of the new maps have been done by Dirk Detweiler Lechty, who did the art in Silent Titans. One of the main problems with the original version of the adventure is that the maps were extremely difficult to read. And I think these maps are a big improvement. They're still a little bit stylized and kind of in almost a cubist style with these blocks everywhere. But it's very easy to read. Everything is clearly labeled. And one thing that Patrick has done throughout using the layout system that he has here is that everything is done in spreads. So right here we have like these numbers, like number 20, number 18. Those refer to the spreads on which you can find the different parts of the adventure. So if I flip through here, this is spread number 16. It encompasses both of these pages, right? And this is spread number 25. So by just looking at the top of the page, you can really quickly find what you need to find. We have our table of contents here, but everything is listed by which spread it's on. I suppose you could just do pages, but actually I found spreads to be even easier to use because it's the same number on both pages. So it's just a little bit faster. And so also within each spread, you often have red items. I'm trying to find an example here. Sections of it where there's unique things that you might need to look up separately. So right here, each of these is in red. Those are like an item within the page. So if you see a red number along with a spread, you know to go to that spread and then look for that red number. So it speeds up reference. We have some notes on how to do the stats. It's statted for really any old school D&D game. I think the original one was for Lamentations, but this would work perfectly well for anything like Old School Essentials or Knave or whatever. We have hooks to start out your characters, whether that's a serious purpose, a call to adventure, or just looking for gold. It could be something like a desperate letter. It's clearly written by a child. They write from a place called Polnagolum village, saying that they have read about your adventures and need help. Treasure promised, a diamond ring included for proof, just to get the players going. And some of these hooks tie into things that actually happen in the adventure later on. The general idea here is that, let's look at the map here. That's probably going to be the most useful. We have this dam here, and there used to be a big lake up here. But the dam has broken, and this entire valley has become just wiped out by the massive ensuing flood. We still have a river here, but the area surrounding the river is still pretty deep in water. And you're going to be dealing with all of the chaos that's ensued. What's the general structure, though, is that you are in a race of sorts, along with a number of other factions, to reach the pit, which is up here. This is an area long buried underneath the lake, but now that the water is gone, it is exposed. And there's all of these rumors that there is tremendous treasure, along with danger, of course, to be found up there. You're heading that way, and a lot of other people are too. Who's going to get there first? What are they going to find? That's what you're playing to find out. The opening scene is done in this flowchart style, where you start out by seeing these three things as soon as the game starts. Three crazy situations. You're in this destroyed, desperate land. There's NPCs scrabbling for survival. Some of them are dying. Some of them are trying to escape. And you have to choose who are you going to help. And then after you interact with one of them, you see two different other encounters that branch off from there. Sometimes you see three if you chose the middle one. And then you kind of work your way down until you get to the end of this section, where you're really going to start your adventure up the river. But this begins the adventure with a sense of desperation, of urgency, of connecting you to a number of characters, some of whom might join your party, and some of whom can give you information about what's really going on here. There are cannibals, there are kids that are on the loose, there are school teachers trying to keep kids together and you can try and help them. There are people that are, for example, we have Tham Rusi stands on the roof of his church and stares at the pillar of steam rising in the distance where the river disappears. He remembers enough of his faith to know that whatever was hidden by the dam should never be released. The dam, the lock, the dam, it must be shut again. You can talk to him and figure out what's going on there. We have this, one of my favorite sets of NPC parties. It's a rival adventuring party. So they're called the Crows. You have Holok by Frozen and Echo by Frozen, the brother and sister. Gar Zagawen. We have Zolushika von der Linth. And that's all of them. But they are an absolutely terrifying group of characters because of the way that they're written. They're not super strong. If your party of reasonably competent adventurers attack them in straight combat, you'd win pretty handily. But this group is like the consummate OSR group, where they're not going to attack you head on. They're going to use guerrilla tactics. They're going to sneak up on you. They're going to set traps. They're going to create as many unfair advantages as possible for when you actually engage them. This makes them completely terrifying, and it's going to really force the players to deal with the adventure like it's the real world. They're going to have to think about how these characters are acting, how they're thinking. That's going to make them paranoid. They're going to have to try and see traps coming and perhaps try and set traps for the Crows if they're going to have a chance of taking them out, because they are going to avoid full confrontational combat as much as possible. We have the tactics that the Crows use, so surveillance, the setup, the positions that they're going to take when they're going to try and attack you, the opening actions, and then their escape, because they never start any kind of fight or confrontation unless they have a means of escape. They'll do stuff like they'll deny you sleep by harassing you at night. They'll do things like they'll send one of their zombies to cling to the bottom of your raft and to track where you are and perhaps attack you at the worst possible opportunity. They have a number of crazy items that make them even more dangerous, like this staff that can raise zombies and command them. We have this bow that he uses like a sniper rifle, along with all sorts of crazy specialized arrows that can do horrible things to you. We have the folds of ghost-like cloth, the ghost-like folds of cloth that Echo can wear over her eyes and allows you to see in perfect blackness. But there's a ghost that walks right behind you as you wear this cloth. And after 12 hours, the effect wears off and you have to feed the ghost a soul. And if you can't, it eats you. Just incredibly evocative, great item writing, stuff that gets you engaged with the world and gets you thinking about how you're going to avoid the consequences of using these items if you pick them up for yourself. Some of the poisons of Gar include things like the Thalmo-conductor. He hits you with this arrow, and then any magic that is shot within the area, no matter what it's targeting, automatically gets targeted at you. We have these golems, which are magical constructs wandering around the valley. They were in charge of repairing and caring for the dam, but they were also powered by the dam. Now that the dam is broken, they are slowly dying. A lot of the layout is very easy to read. It's done in this very clear font. It's on black and white. There are instances where there's some questionable choices, like this table right here. It's really hard to read. It's in tiny little font. There's a lot of like blank space around it, where maybe it'd be easier to just shrink this picture down a bit and put the table up there. Overall, it's not hard to read, but it does feel like it could have been polished a little bit more. All of the golems have a different die shape for a head, like a 12-sided die or a 20-sided die. We have the route to the observatory here. So we're going to go up the river, and there's a lot of different things we can see along the way. We can either stick to the river, or you can cut over land in many places. So how the players approach that is going to be up to them. Here's the general structure of the race. So the players are assumed to be roughly in the lead of the race most of the time, and the crows, that evil adventuring party, is going to be dogging them at every turn. They could get ahead of the PCs, but they've decided that the best strategy is just to kill anyone who's behind them. So they're going to be pestering you continually until you find a way to deal with them. We have a group of cannibals coming up right behind you. We have the concerned citizens from the nearby town that was wiped out, the Church of the Optical God, a bunch of clerics, and Snail Shell Zarathustra. And we have some other NPCs that might be coming along as well. I like how we have an actual explanation for the water depth here by the way that the land around the river is shaded. So if it's actually like dark water, then it's like 12 to 40 feet deep. And then anything that is shaded as that would be the dark water. That's up to waist deep. So you're going to have a really hard time moving around in it. And anything that's B is going to be the shaded area over here, where it's going to be knee high. You can move, but it's going to be slow going. And then beyond that, in the C area, it's going to be like ankle deep mud, which is annoying, but you can travel. And then D is dry land. So just by telling the Game Master where you're traveling, and each of these squares is about 3 miles across, you're going to be able to know the terrain type just by looking at the picture. Random encounters that you can come across here. All sorts of weird things that have been washed down out of the dam and out of the lake that are now appearing floating in the river. For example, a quasi-Egyptian sarcophagus with a mummy inside who is lawful good and has some really powerful artifacts that could be extremely useful. But players are probably going to want to fight him because he's a mummy. If they find a way to communicate, they may realize he could be a very useful ally. Although a mummy falling into the water is bad news for him. We have a windmill with these giant crabs that are attacking the blades of the windmill and climbing up it, creating a very dynamic situation. And there's people inside that you can rescue if you want to take that risk. We have things like a hill full of animals where you can try and use those animals to feed nearby villages. We have wizard duels where wizards are standing on a log or a submerged bridge in the middle of the river fighting each other. It's one interesting situation after another. We have the witch in the water, who is a witch that has been killed multiple times before, and only children are able to see her or at least remember her, whereas adults continually forget her. In order to kill her, you need to find a new way to take her out, because every time she gets killed, she becomes immune to that form of damage. So by this point, she's immune to like fire and to burning and to stabbing and to crushing and to slicing. You need to come up with new ways to kill her. We reach the dam itself, and you can either try and find a way to climb straight through the dam, or you can try and climb up either side here, because there was a number of rooms inside the dam that were pretty much hidden, but now they've been revealed because it's cracked right down the middle. So you can either go up this way and explore these rooms, or explore these rooms this way. What's fun about this path is that there's a number of traps here, because this is kind of like a mummy's tomb situation. But the assumption was that any invading tomb robbers were going to go in this direction. So you're kind of going in the opposite direction than the builders assumed you would be going in. So you're seeing all these traps kind of in reverse. You're able to anticipate them. We have a whole bunch of evil things, the things in jars you probably don't want to touch, but players are probably going to do that anyway. The canopic guards. We have great situations like pit trap bureaucrats, where if you step on the wrong square in this room, you get dropped into this pit along with a whole bunch of bureaucrats who start moaning and trying to scratch at you. Moving past the dam, we get up into the Profundal Zone, which is what used to be a lake and is now just a mat of algae as all of the water has been drained out. There's a number of different factions here that you can deal with. For example, there are some lizard, salamander-like creatures, and their main enemy is the reed people who lived on a floating barge or a floating village at the surface level of the lake. But now the lake has been drained, they're now at the bottom of the lake, and they're forced to face off against these enemies of theirs. You have information on how you can talk to them, perhaps make allies with them. They have their own buried dead that they used to sink to the bottom of the lake, which is now at ground level for them. So there's that element there as well. And there's a possible war with the Newt people, along with diagrams for how this war would play out. And so you can interfere with that or help one side or another as you see fit. Or, of course, you can just ignore them entirely. Once you reach the end of the Profundal Zone, you come to the pit itself, which is this black, terrifying pit going straight down. And once you reach here, what you notice is that the entire lake bed, or all of the walls around the lake bed, let's go back to this map here, all of the walls around the outside of it have all of these mirrors that are pointing light towards the pit. And once you actually get to the pit, all of these continue to focus light into it, as if whoever designed this pit has created this entire structure around it in the lake in order to blast it with light perpetually. So that should be somewhat terrifying, that it's trying to drown the area in light because something is down there. And the main thing down there is this guy, the giant. So the Deep Carbon Observatory is the dungeon that we find inside the pit. And it is generally empty. There's a couple of things down there, but most things aren't going to attack you directly. There's no real monsters except for this giant, this huge 20-foot tall man creature whose bones are made of like cartilage, like a shark's. So we can deform and squeeze his body through almost any size of a hole. So even when you're crawling through these small passages and rooms, you can see this thing crawling through the darkness towards you, like reaching its hand out, trying to grab you and like rip your arms off. It's a really terrifying image and one of the best monsters in the old school scene. It was, at least subliminally, I think, an inspiration for me having the giant in my own game, The Waking of Willoughby Hall. Because having this one huge thing that is incredibly hard to kill and deal with, chasing you at all times, is just a great idea. We have a map of the observatory itself. And what this is these are stalactites. And the players aren't going to realize this right away. As they descend this way down from the pit, they're just going to be wandering around inside this apparent dungeon full of weird things. But eventually, they're going to reach this bridge, or perhaps climb down this chain, or go along this staircase on the outside, and realize that what they are inside of is two skyscraper-sized stalactites hanging in this infinite void that just stretches out forever beneath them, giving you this sense of scale and awe of what's below you, which is the Underdark. And that's what the observatory is designed to observe. All of the rooms here are packed with great ideas. Especially when we get to this section here, when we start climbing down this chain, there's all sorts of these little rooms leading off of these doorways, which I guess you can swing over to. And they're full of these great treasures from deep time. Because I would assume that this structure being built by the dam builders is incredibly old. And of course, the Drow civilization down in the Underdark is even older. So the sense of a scale of time and this ancient history is brought out in all of the weird artifacts that you discover here. Including beings that are elementals that are trapped from the plane of poison, the salt dryads that you can interact with. Geo Samples, this is one of my favorite ones, which is just core samples of sections of rock. This ties into Patrick Stewart's other book, The Veins of the Earth, very clearly, where there's this obsession with strata and the way that time builds up in layers. So, for example, we can look at all these core samples stored in this room. And here is a sample that what looks like ultra-compressed and tectonically warped bones. The space between the bones is actually more bones. Skull, limb, and tooth fragments suggest creatures evolved for predation. Its label is the vampire strata. Or perhaps cobbles, masonry, glass, and ceramic litter, signs of everyday life, then fire, ash, charcoal, burned bones, then life, cobbles, food fragments, toys, etc. 1,000 such events repeated into geological time. The label is the carbon layers of the 1,000 times burned city. And these things aren't really explained. They're just there. You just find them and you get to decide what they mean. We have a nightmare librarian with a magic book that isn't really a magic book. It just contains psychological tricks to understand your enemies. And once unleashed, it can slowly corrupt civilizations from the inside. Eventually, we get down to the observatory itself, which is this crazy lens that can see deep into the Underdark, and you can get some revelations of the horrors contained there. The Tektite lens. By rolling on these tables, you can create these visions that your players are able to see. Perhaps you could see something like catalyzed creatures of black burning fire. What's a hidden quality that they have? They're assassinating their friends. What are they doing? They're quietly escaping the sentinels of, and then you could roll on another faction. Place or polity that you might see. Perhaps it is an eye tyrant town's panoptic radial lanes, or devour your capital city 1A. Or with this hidden result or quality, repairing their prestige. So by combining this, you get to see these visions of things that are happening in the Underdark far beneath you. Here's an example right here. The result might be former omnipotents sharing a fear, hated by those like them, who are carving porphyry maps to save rust veins of the oxidized autocrat unexpectedly fast. Got to interpret that however you will. We have a library with some crazy books that you can read. And a vault that you can raid. There is a tremendous amount of treasure that is possible to find within the Deep Carbon Observatory. The question is, how are you going to get it out alive with the giant chasing you? Of course, there's also the general chase that's going on of the other factions coming after you. So once the players enter Deep Carbon Observatory, you can have a whole bunch of other people, possibly including the crows, coming in after them and causing even further chaos. And it has an index at the very back with some great maps. So this is one of my favorite adventures in terms of the sheer density of ideas. If you liked Veins of the Earth and the feel that gave off and the creativity that was found in that book, then this is that, but in adventure form. From what I understand, Patrick is working on further adventures set in this same world, perhaps as prequels or sequels to Deep Carbon Observatory. So keep an eye out for those. I strongly recommend this book. It is one of my favorite things to read and just to ponder in my own head. It gives you so many great adventure ideas. So check it out in the description below, where I will put a link for where you can get it for yourself. Quick shout out to some of our patrons over on Patreon for helping to support the channel, including Joey Trapp, Neil Scoofus, Jacob Marks, Gaspard, and Joshua Selesnik. Thank you so much, guys, for helping to support the channel. And thank you for watching. We'll see you guys next time.